This is Catherine Schneider from the Fitchburg Historical Society, and we are so pleased this morning to have as our guest Pastor Rich Johnson, former pastor at the All Saints Lutheran Church in Fitchburg, located on the corner of McKee Road and Chapel Valley Road. So welcome.
Correct. Thank you, Catherine.
Pastor
Good to be
Rich.
here with you.
Thank you. Well, first question we'd like to ask you is, knowing about when you were pastor, maybe your years there of service, and then a bit about your own background in ministry and what brought you to that.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, we had, my family and I had arrived in Fitchburg in August of 1994, and I was called to be a mission developer. The church was going to close, or they were talking about that, so we were kind of give one more try to see what we could do, and so so we were there in 1994, and then I retired from there in 2017. So
long-term service.
It was
there.
longer than I expected. So, but it just kept on going, and new challenges and new opportunities, and before you know it, there you go. So
Great. And what brought you to ministry originally?
Yeah, originally I was going to go into commercial art and design, and I really enjoyed being creative and graphic arts and things like that, and advertising. And my pastors that I had in confirmation had always encouraged me to think of pastoral ministry. And then when I was in college, I remember praying something to the effect of, "Well, Lord, if you want me to go to seminary," because that would be another 4 years after college, and I think maybe I was having enough schooling at that point. I just had a change of heart between my second and third year, and so then I began to take all the requirements like Greek and Hebrew and so forth, and felt a real peace that this is how I could serve my Lord and my neighbor, and so enrolled at Luther Seminary in 1978, graduated in 1982, and took calls in Illinois, and then in Wisconsin at All Saints in Fitchburg.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah, you're
filling us in
welcome.
on that journey and how you got called. Let's turn to maybe the history then of All Saints itself, and just a number of maybe points about that. When did it come into existence, and what was the impetus for forming that particular congregation? How was the location chosen, and then maybe the makeup of the church membership itself?
Yeah,
or whatever you'd like to address.
Yeah, good questions. Good questions, Catherine. In the 1990s, Fitchburg was a really growing community, and also very large. It's 6 by 6 miles by 6 miles, from what I'm remembering. And our denomination at that time was the Lutheran Church in America, or LCA for church alphabet soup type of things, and they were looking at the community, and they said, wow, there seems to be a need for some service and some outreach there, and there weren't a whole lot of churches in Fitchburg at that time. And so in the mid-1980s, they had a pastor who was interested in being a mission developer, starting a church, and they bought a parsonage in Arbor Hills, just outside of Fitchburg, literally on the border. I think the railroad tracks were in the backyard, and then outside of that was Fitchburg. And they were meeting at Leopold School for a while on the far south side of Madison, and then they became a church in 1987. A first building was built in 1991/1992, I believe, in quite a variety of people. It was really quite a mix. People that had church experience, people that didn't, people that were coming new to the faith, people that were questioning. Pretty decent ethnic mix as well. And so that's kind of how it started. And the name All Saints, they wanted it to be open to all people as well. Wherever you're coming from, wherever you're at. And we were one of the few churches that had a logo with people on our graphic, as opposed to a church building or something like that. And it showed Jesus leading a group of people who were young, old, one in a wheelchair, somebody carrying a lunch bucket, another older person kind of hunched over with a walker. And I thought that image really said what All Saints was trying to do, to follow the shepherd, and there's more room in line, and so come be a part of that. So so that's some of the impetus that I think they had started to really be open to all people wherever they were, and the location was just excellent, right on McKee Road. At that time, it was a 2-lane highway. So yeah.
And from the McKee farm, I'm sure that was originally
the McKee farm was still there.
family
I
farm.
remember visiting some of the workers there in the barn, and the farmhouse was just across the street from us. And I remember when they had it was vacant, and they burned it down, and they had a fire, drill exercise there, and they were using that for training purposes. So yeah, it's really changed. The area has really changed. And
I was going to say, you've seen that development take place.
yeah,
And,
big time,
yes.
big time. Yeah.
And the location certainly very prime in terms of being well located for traffic going by, for people visibility, and accessibility for people to get to.
Yes, yes. And when the church was built, there were no stairs in the church at all. The only stair was in the altar. We call it the chancel area, where the altar is lifted up. That was the only step in the whole place. So we really wanted to make it accessible just with people with different abilities.
Wonderful. So let's maybe talk a little bit about then the founding values of the church and what those were.
Yeah, we had some founding values, and I think the first one we had were people. We really wanted to see each individual as a unique creation of God. That we had a phrase every Sunday morning. I would say, "Nobody's here by accident, and nobody is an accident." And so that was our first one. And the second one was God's Word. We wanted that to be our compass wherever we were going. And then the third one we wanted to have was forgiveness. That we believe that because of Christ's death and resurrection, we are set free, and we wanted to model that in our relationships with each other, sort of on the horizontal as well as the vertical. And I used to remind people of that. We had a cross in the front of our chancel area, and said, we talk about our relationship with God this way, just like the cross, and we talk about our relationship with each other this way. So that was one of our key values, along with community. And we had sensed that Fitchburg was a really varied community, almost like a number of small towns built upon small towns, because I probably visited 4,000 or 5,000 homes when I was a mission developer, and it was almost like just visiting different towns, Jamestown, and then you go to Country Vineyard, and then you go to the area that's just outside of Oregon, and so forth. And so community, we really wanted to create that. And a phrase we had, Catherine, was, we want All Saints to be a safe and joyous place, because it can't really be joyous unless somebody feels safe. And if somebody feels safe, and we're proclaiming the gospel as we feel called to do, I think the joy will follow. So those were some of our at least 4 key values that we tried to model, not always perfectly, of course, but with God's grace to do that. So yeah.
Thank you. Such a welcome to put out to people in the community.
That's a good word, and that's what we wanted to do, because we don't know who is going to come through those doors every Sunday, and it's not such an easy thing to come into those doors, especially if you're by yourself or a single person or have just gone through a crisis. So, yeah.
Thank you. Well, that may lead us directly into church architecture, because I think as people go by a church, they notice the first thing they see is the building itself, and then the architecture and what the meaning is behind the architecture.
Yeah, good
Why was
questions.
it chosen? So maybe you could address that a little bit.
Yeah, they chose to really have a very pronounced roof line, and I think they wanted to have some things that maybe spoke to traditional church architecture, and yet were different. So it was a very steep roof that could be seen. They used to say, "Oh yeah, I know where your church is. It's the church with the big brown roof." Right, that's it. And then we had a very large white cross that was in front of it. And I think we were talking just in our pre-show that we could see that cross from North Fish Hatchery as well as South Fish Hatchery Road before all the the building went up. And so it was a simple structure. We wanted it to be warm, so we used a lot of earth tones, a lot of natural woods, probably a minimal of concrete, save the floor and so forth and the carpet. And so we wanted to have that sense that almost like you're in a holy, sacred lodge with that type of warmth and that type of color. And we never had an organ on the inside of the church either. And so part of it is that those are big. The sanctuary wasn't very big. It takes a highly skilled person to play those, and they're not as abundant as one might want them to be. And so I I think we tried to keep the architecture simple and yet distinctive. And so those earth tones, that warmth, as well as the accessibility, that's kind of where we were going with that. So.
Sounds like it was very carefully thought out.
I think so. I think the original developer and the committee did that. Yeah.
Thank you. And how have you seen All Saints evolve through these years? Certainly you had a long tenure there as pastor, maybe in the sense of mission, community, involvement, worship, stewardship.
That's a really good question. When you gave me the questions, that one got me thinking the most, and just how things have kind of morphed and changed. I think at first there was, maybe in the mid-'90s, more of a concern about survival, how do we sustain ourselves and so forth. And I think as we moved on, we became more acutely aware of the community around us and the opportunity to serve the community. And I think one of the most exciting changes was when we began to partner with other churches and city leaders in how we can help as a community of churches meet the needs of Fitchburg, which was growing and changing. And also it's incredibly diverse. I mean, when you go up to the Leopold area, which is still Fitchburg, it gets into Madison, but that's incredibly different than the Highlands of Seminole, where, across from our church, or Country Vineyard, which is that way, or Jamestown. And so that probably was, I think, a real key piece in just getting outside ourselves and working with the mayor's office, chief of police, the fire chief, as well as other church leaders and Leopold School, to see how can we come alongside the teachers who work very hard and do a very good job in helping that community to flourish. And so there were a number of programs that blossomed out of that.
So really turning outward from building your own community, and then turning out to the world surrounding you.
Exactly. And All Saints has about 4.5 acres, maybe 5 acres on that corner. And we didn't need all that. And so at one point, we have had a lot of gardeners, and we found out that doing some demographic study, gardening is one of the big hobbies in this demographic. And not everybody has a big yard or whatever to do that. And so we opened up a community garden there for free. Whoever wants to come, they get a plot. And at one point, Catherine, we had probably almost 40 gardeners from 6 different countries. It was amazing. Yeah, we had an older gentleman who had family who's from Russia. We had another family from Liberia, and they were trying to grow things that they grew in Liberia in the garden, and it worked. So it was just delightful. And that was just an area where we had people that, all parts of Fitchburg, that came for that. And then at the end of the year, we would have a garden party, and we would have somebody from the extension maybe share some insights and what to expect for next year, that type of thing. So those were examples of kind of turning outward in some service as well as some, recreational ways. So that was delightful, though. And I'm not a gardener. I had a garden that says, well, what do you grow? And I said, well, I hope friendships, because I'm not doing much else. So.
So the opportunity, I'm hearing it as you're talking about the various people who came within your orbit in the church, because you had that opening for them, opening up land and space for gardening, and then obviously the draw of having that many people come. Obviously you provided a space for them that was needed.
That's a good word, that space. Yeah, that's a really good word. And there were a variety of people there. We had kids. We had people from McKee Farms Park Apartments that were next door that would come. And then we would gather produce and we would bring it to St. Mark's Food Pantry, which was a partner church with All Saints for a while. St. Mark's is over on Spruce Street in Madison.
Wonderful connections to make in the community and with one another, for sure. So I'd just like to kind of maybe pull back a bit and look at the big picture, look at your years as pastor at All Saints, and what would you name maybe as the significant challenges that the church had, and maybe the greatest blessings that
that's a good question. Yeah, and some of the challenges are, how to create a sense of community in a very diverse community, how to do that. And that was, because we had people that were from all different types of social backgrounds, economic backgrounds, racial backgrounds. And one of the things that seemed to work was we had a small group ministry which invited people to come into people's homes for either Bible study, topical studies, thematic studies, and then also create a service project as well out of that. And that seemed to, I don't want to say break down the walls, that seemed to build bridges, let me put it that way. And we also had a number of creative people at All Saints, with the arts, with music, and we had started a drama ministry, which, and I'm not a thespian, but we had people that were really good at it. And that seemed to bring people together as well, not just older, middle-aged people, but kids. So for an example, during Lent, the 40 days before Easter, we would have midweek services, and we would have dramas that were made, designed by one of our members that would involve up to 30 people. We'd have kids as young as 6 years old, easy parts, right? And we'd have a guy, he was a banker that was involved too, and it was just a really different role for him. And we would have, the church would be packed. We'd have a potluck before, and everybody would bring something. It'd always turn out. And then we would have a short service with the drama, and the little kids would sit up on the floor in the front, and the church was filled, and it was just a way to create a sense of community because we all came from different backgrounds, and that was probably a challenge. And I think, and of course, there's always financial challenges, sometimes we operate like a MASH unit, remember the show?
Oh, yes.
You just have enough to get by, and you're doing that. But that's also exciting because we see how God provides in ways that we don't expect. So,
Well, and I think the arts are a way of drawing people together. So not only the land, but I'm thinking you also tapped into the arts to draw people together. Certainly the creativity that was there involved in that.
Yeah, and music too. I don't want to leave that out because even if people aren't good at singing, almost everybody likes music, and so that was a real strength. We just had people that were high quality musicians that I think were attracted by that God drew there. And also I think having them there draws other people there. And so I'm a musician, an amateur, and every now and then I got to play with the band, but it's like, these people are like studio musicians. I'm way out of my league, but again, everybody's welcome. Let's bring your gifts. Let's see what happens. And remind me to tell you about the Latino church we partnered with as well, which was really fascinating. I wasn't aware of the Latino community that was here as much as I should have been, but yeah.
Oh, please tell us about that.
Yeah, there was a church in our denomination said, there's a significant Latino community here. And as I started to look at some of the demographics as well as just my traffic patterns, I said, yeah, there is. And so a church was started called Santa Maria, and they used our space, but we were partners with them. We just didn't rent out space to them. And so we would do things together. We would have meals together. We would do some service pieces together. We would have worship service together about once every couple of months. It was wonderful. I mean, trying to sing songs in Spanish and singing songs in English, and just the musicians. It was just a delightful way of how Christ breaks down barriers. And here we had people that were from Mexico, Puerto Rico, Cuba, immigrants, and here we are together, using creativity. So yeah, I didn't want to leave that out because that was just really a bright spot. Would it work? People say, well, I don't know if it's going to work. It's going to happen to the building, and I don't know, maybe some good things will happen to the building.
And indeed they did.
They did, yeah.
Oh, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, sure. I just found, I don't think I had that in my pre-show notes here, but yeah.
Wonderful story to hear. You've talked about the Fitchburg community and its diversity and so on. Would you like to add anything more about your sense of the community of Fitchburg?
Yeah, I think people really have a heart for service here, and we rarely had a problem getting volunteers to whether it was for the food pantry, whether it was for the personal essentials pantry, which this collaboration of churches started with the mayor's office and social workers and Leopold School. So I really think the community has a heart for service. And I think, if I were to put it in theological terms, it would be, as a Christian, how do I serve God and my neighbor? And so I think the "and my neighbor" was a real driver there.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on the cooperation that went on with the city and the other churches? You mentioned a food pantry and essential toiletries. Where was that located, and how did, maybe a little bit more about that?
Yeah. It started by, at that time the mayor was Sean, make sure I'm pronouncing his last name,
Sean Paff.
Paff, thank you. And so Sean Paff was the mayor, and we would have informal meetings with him and a couple of my members up at the Rolling Pin. That was sort of our headquarters for that. We would just meet up there, and pretty soon it said, well, maybe we should meet with the churches to talk about what some of these needs are. And he really wanted to see the churches collaborate and work on meeting some of the needs that he was aware of at a higher level is, a mayor and the city council and so forth. And so one of the things we found out is that there was a gap between food pantries that were located outside of Fitchburg or near Fitchburg and in town. And so we said, what can we do? And so long story short, Catherine, is that Arbor Covenant Church, which is just on the edge of Madison, Fitchburg, behind Kaiser Ford, said we'd be glad to use our facility. And so 8 churches cooperated along with some of the city fathers and mothers to say, let's get this going. We did some of the background work, and so we launched what's called the Good Neighbor Personal Essentials Pantry. And I want to say, I don't have a date on that, it was, I'm thinking around 2012, 11, somewhere in there. It probably served, my goodness sakes, maybe 40, 50 families a week, giving them things like if they have small children, diapers, formula, things like that, types of groceries, personal products, and never had problems staffing it. It was just amazing. It was during daylight hours. We would have, it would be open on Fridays and maybe a couple other days from 9 to 12, something like that. But that came out of a collaboration with Mayor Sean and others and some social workers at Leopold to say, here's something we can do. And again, never had a problem with finances, never had maybe a little problem, but but and the same thing with volunteers, So that was an example of some of that collaboration, which started at the Rolling Pin and then ended up at the Personal Essentials Pantry. So yeah.
It shows the power of community and cooperation, doesn't it?
And there was an energy that happened there. And we would meet later on. I think we started in probably 2012. Once a month we would meet with city leaders, all the churches and staff if we could. It would be like at 7:30 to 8:15 or something like that, to say what's going on in the city, what do we need to wear, what are churches doing, how might we problem solve together. And that happened about every month, and I think it's still going on. I'd have to check on that, but that was just a real blessing to say, how can we be part of this? And there was just an energy from that just moved outside those walls. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. If the Catholic Church or the UCC Church is doing something, we don't have to do it over them. So.
Well, and I'm just thinking of how that has been so wonderful to also say something about the Fitchburg community itself. As you said, you never had problems with volunteers and the financial piece and the government working with the churches and the private sector.
Correct.
I mean, just all of that coming together. I think that's a real tribute to the Fitchburg community.
It is, and I think that was unique. Sometimes it doesn't always happen that way. There's just not the momentum or the energy, but it did. So.
Thank you for sharing
Sure,
that.
absolutely.
My final question is going to be a reflective one about serving All Saints congregation, and maybe what stands out to you as maybe some really special moments that you'll always cherish about being pastor there.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I had kind of think on that one, and I guess 3 things came to mind briefly. And one was when we would celebrate not just baptisms, but adult baptisms. People that had come to Christ, heard the good news, said, this is incredible. I've never been baptized. What do I need to do? And I remember on Christmas Eve one year we had a family of 4, mom and pop and the 2 girls baptized. And it was just an incredibly sacred, holy moment that was just, all heaven was rejoicing. It was just a wonderful time. And so there were a number of those that happened. And it didn't always happen on Christmas Eve, of course, but that was a really neat piece. The other piece was when we had a number of families from Africa. There is, I don't know if you'd say an African-American community living in Madison, but these families were from Liberia. And they came to our church, and I asked them, well, how did you find our church? And they said, well, I drive by here every day on the way to work, that visibility that we talked about earlier. I said, and he said, and I drove by and I thought, some Sunday I'm going to come and find out what kind of people are in there. And so he came, and then his wife came, and then his son came, and his daughter came, and their grandkids came, and I baptized their grandkids. And so, and I was just amazed at the variety of the African community in Madison. So that was just a joy to see that kind of cultural leap. And the other piece, the third story I remember, is that we really want to talk about All Saints being a safe and joyous place. And we had a mom that had come to our church. She hadn't been going to church for a while. And she says, I have a son, and he's trying to be a recovering person, and he doesn't know if he's welcome. And, would you welcome him if he comes? And I said, absolutely. But even more important is that God welcomes him, and Christ runs to meet him when he comes here. And so we also found there's a number of recovering folk in the community as well. Drugs and alcohol, like a lot of places, are an issue. And so those were 3 things that just stuck in my mind: the families from Liberia, the baptisms, and people that just wondered if they were welcome, and then to welcome them when they did come. So yeah.
Thank you, Pastor
You're welcome.
Rich.
You're welcome.
What rich stories you have shared with us about All Saints and the community that it is, and how it's impacted Fitchburg and beyond. And it's just so heartening to hear you witness to that.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity and for the work you're doing for the Historical Society. It's just, I can't wait to go on the website and see the other things that are on there too. So.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
And the Fitchburg Historical Society does have their website, and I'll just remind people of that. It's fitchburghistory.org, and we invite people to come to that space in the web world and just enjoy what we have there about the story of Fitchburg.